I am a doll maker, an artist who makes original decorative dolls, or, more precisely, sculptured dolls. It's hard to imagine that 20 years ago this craft did not exist at all. There were only theatrical dolls, collector's dolls, ethnographic dolls, ceremonial dolls, children's toy dolls, and that is probably it. At the beginning of the 1990s, craftspeople in different parts of St. Petersburg did make dolls, but they were not sculpture dolls. The craftspeople were professional artists of the theatre, of fine arts, designers and decorators. Everyone found their own way to making sculptured dolls. Some started with ceramic plastics, some from theatrical and ethnographic dolls. Others came from the design world, yet others, like me, arrived at it spontaneously. Art historians defined our creations as needlework, handcraft, wood carving, or toys. What is it that inspires someone to become a doll maker? It is probably everything that surrounds them in childhood. I grew up in a Leningrad communal apartment in a small, elongated room shaped like a railway carriage. At one end of this carriage there was a window facing north, overlooking a tiny courtyard. The sun's rays never reached the window, but this window was the entrance to the world of my childhood fantasies. In summer, there was a coolness with a damp smell of mould. A mystical light poured into the room. In winter, a fluffy theatrical snow fell vertically. However, this was only a background. The most important detail was the opposite wall, where a rusty water pipe ran along one edge. What my eyes saw was not a wall, but the illustrated page of a huge stone book with pictures which changed each time I looked. Out of every dirty drip, crack, piece of chipped plaster or brick, some fairy tale images peeped out for me.
Махнем, не глядя, как на фронте говорят.
After my compulsory military service, I enrolled in evening drawing classes at the Academy of Arts. While I worked at the Leningrad cinema, I became lifelong friends with Larisa Pogoretskaya, who is now a famous fashion designer, and Tolya Bisinbayev, who is now a well-known photographer.
Hi, Romik. I can't imagine that you are no more, and I therefore am certain that at some stage we will run into each other at the gate of 60 Dekabristov Street, and as always we'll go for a coffee at the cafe opposite your home, and you will say in your distinctive voice, "Hi, Laryun." I believe that you are somewhere nearby, maybe with the angels looking at us and smiling. We are grateful that you existed, and you will be with us forever.
Hi, Roma. We've been together for 40 years. And that you have left and that we are going to leave is not important. We will always be together. I have never had a better friend than you. 40 years together, and we never quarreled. We have never betrayed one another, in art or in life. Of course I miss you, because every morning you would drop by and we would go together for a cup of coffee. Now Larissa and I are relaxing here, and hopefully God created paradise to look just like this place. I am certain that you are looking at us now. I love you.
Back then, in the 1980s, they showed me, an inhibited former conscript, the free life of a Bohemian artist. I remember with warmth and nostalgia the wonderful atmosphere that lifted the spirits in Leningrad at the end of the 1980s. This perestroika euphoria occurred despite the appalling state of the city, its houses, shop fronts, and the lack of goods on sale. Anyway, everyone had become used to the city's devastation. I worked as a graphic designer in different city organizations, mainly in cinemas. This profession was for artists what the job of boiler stoker was for musicians. Protection from being charged with parasitism and attacks by journalists with TV cameras. Why are you on the street while the whole country is standing beside a factory machine, eh? Many of my acquaintances had created small tailoring cooperatives, businesses allowed under perestroika. Our citizens could then be impressed by any bright colour, except red. I started to reinvent the wheel in the form of unpretentious patterns, fancy seams, and braces, creating several funny personalities. I tried to sell my works in the Catherine Garden in the city centre. When I first hung up dolls on a fence surrounding the garden, I heard a question from the other artists. Have you already paid for protection? I then saw these cute, spiritualized gentlemen in track pants that in Russia were symbols of belonging to organized crime, and my desire to exhibit in a public place disappeared. Energetic people exporting the works of Leningrad artists began to appear. My textile dolls also gained attention, and an offer was made to send a small collection to Hamburg. Life has taken a great turn for the better, I thought, and imagined bright pictures of my artistic future. But when I came for my fee, they put a handful of German coins in my hand. It was not possible to exchange them for rubles. I had to spend all the money in the only currency bar in Nevsky Prospect on a pack of Marlboro and a bottle of Coca-Cola. So off I went along the Fontanka River, smoked a Western cigarette, sipped a drink, and life seemed beautiful to me. One of the first significant centers of creative life in Leningrad during perestroika was the cooperative Palitra. The cooperative organized a beautiful gallery space in Staronevsky Prospect. Its director was Andrei Shirkunov. The gallery and the small cafe next to it suddenly became cold party places. I am very grateful to Palitra that for the first time, perhaps in the history of our country, it presented a doll, made by an artist as a work of art, to the public.
I have known Roma since 1989. Then a door simply opened and a smiling guy came in with his dolls. One of them still lives at my place. That is, the type of toy dolls he used to make at the time. But in the late 90s, he started to use his current way of doll making, which I think is a more St. Petersburg style. His first dolls were very funny, and the portraits he used to paint back then looked just like those dolls. Today, I was walking through a passage under Nevsky Prospect and was very pleased to see several kiosks with souvenirs. Each kiosk were selling Roma's angels, ranging in size from 3 centimeters high to quite big. They are already symbols of St. Petersburg. Despite his rather light character, Roma has made a big mark on history. I'm very pleased about that, and very sad that he's gone.
Step by step, my creative experience was building up. I began to assemble dolls, making their heads and hands from papier-mâché. To my great joy, I finally met my first colleague in doll manufacture, Yelena Kuznetsova. Cafes and small restaurants with individual peculiar features, conceptual designs and original menus began to appear in the city. Best of all was that their interiors were enlivened by full-size dolls. The very first of my full-size dolls was a firefighter in Cafe 01 in Karavanaya Ulica. Its head was made of papier-mâché and the body was made of textile on a frame. Back then, I had not yet invented my own creative technique of painting and decorating dolls, and just decorated them like toys. In the next 10 years, I took part in designing dolls for many public institutions, including for exhibitions at major museums.
Меня зовут Богодур Одиссей, я уронил палантир в Енисей. Если хочешь пожать, то посей, но не ходи у меня по голове, фарисей. Моя машина на собачьем ходу, я прихожу в тяжелом бреду. Мое видение предвещает беду, но не зови меня, я все равно не приду.
Пошел вон, Вавилон, Вавилон пошел вон.
Ты ревешь, как раненый слон, пошел вон, вон, Вавилон. Твои души взяты в полон, ты не живой, ты клон. Ты не слыхал, как поет Авалон, пошел вон, вон, Вавилон.
I did not know Roman Shustrov well, but the brief minutes that I spent together with him left a great impression on me. And the name The Fat Fellow has in mind art dolls, the heroes of the pubs I own. These dolls, of course, did a great deal for the popularity of these outlets. Roman was a wonderful person, and this is evident in what he created. And I am very sorry that he is no longer with us. But death is such that it always strikes at the best, the most talented, and the worthy. May Roman enter the kingdom of heaven and enjoy eternal glory. I think his creations will continue to please people's eyes and souls for many years to come.
I discovered new horizons in Leteny Prospect, which crosses Tchaikovsky Street, where I grew up. One day, as I walked along Leteny Prospect, I saw a poster on the doors of the company French Corner with an invitation to visit an exhibition of artistic dolls. Full of trepidation and excitement, I climbed the stairs to the exhibition. In front of me was the realization of one of my dreams, an exhibition of sculptured dolls and decorative toys. The exhibition was not big, but very impressive. There were elegant female puppet silhouettes by Marina Kholmova, cinematic constructions by Viktor Grigoriev, original wooden toys by Viktor Danilov. But who was the enthusiast who brought the exhibition together? I wanted to find out immediately. It turned out to be art historian Maria Marchenko, who invited me to join forces with her. She had already come up with the idea of holding a huge exhibition of sculptured dolls and artistic toys, serious games. She was familiar with many doll makers who were working in different genres and were willing to partake in the exhibition.
When I got to know Roman, he was working with the technique known as textile doll making. This is a special kind of soft doll when the form of the doll is created by pulling and stretching by means of the stitches. Art dolls, which were just emerging then, have slowly evolved to become today's versions. There was no polymer clay back then. All doll makers had to work with what was a primitive, creepy Soviet versions of plasticine, which was hard to work with. And from the minimum of the materials, from old rags and beads, polymer clay, from plaster, from ceramics, we didn't even have porcelain heads in Russia. They made amazing, sincere and pretty soulful things.
I visited the workshops in the village of artist Shuvalova Ozeki. I drove to see Alexandra Dobrovina. I got acquainted with Lev Smorgon, the creator of a popular design of plastic dolls in the Soviet Union. I understood how wide the range of art dolls was. It was the exhibition Serious Games that awakened the general public of St. Petersburg to our genre and became the most important factor in the shift of doll making from obscurity to in-demand art. Observing the works of my colleagues, communicating with art critics, and demonstrating to visitors the possibilities of original mechanical toys and objects of art, I tried to define the direction of artistic dolls, the area I was working in. I had to reflect on everything: folk ceremonial dolls, theatrical puppets, dolls made from wood or textiles and with a frame or without, dolls on walls, dolls made of papier-mâché, ceramics from pasted cotton wool with a frame, costume dolls with porcelain heads, on stands or without them, and many others. Which of them were art objects? Which were art dolls? Which were decorative dolls? I was at a loss to answer. For example, the figures of Natalia Beltyukova made of papier-mâché. She thought they were art objects. I consider them to be decorative dolls. They were, however, sculptured dolls, but we didn't know that yet.
At the beginning of our doll-making activities, Roma and I often talked about what we were actually doing. How would we name it? I was saying that a doll must be able to move its arms, legs, be able to be dressed, undressed, and be put to bed. Like any toy, it must interact with its owner, or spectator. It can also be played with. It's an object of art, if you like. This was the definition I insisted on most often: a piece of art. But there were doubts if what we did was possible to call art at all. Now, an annual Moscow exhibition called The Art of the Doll, or a magazine with the same name, do not cause any surprise. These names are pretty convincing. But back then, all our arguments used to end the same way. What difference does it make? We make them because we can't stop it. It's like a passion. Now, I can put a name to what Roma did. Sculptures, without the word doll. Most of his works can be easily enlarged and placed in an urban environment, and they will work there. His small sculptures are already sitting in the city, and we enjoy them. They're sitting here, they're sitting there. It would be good if at least one of his works is enlarged and displayed in our city. That would be wonderful.
At that moment, I had to exchange my freedom and independence for a prop workshop in the Vera Komisarjevskaya Theatre. On the eve of winter, without any means of subsistence, orders are rare, and suddenly a workshop with central heating in the very heart of the city. And most important were the warm, friendly, democratic and talented theatre staff. They took me on for 6 whole years. My salary amounted to 800 rubles a month. It wasn't enough to buy a winter jacket, and the frosts had already started. Once, passing by the dressing room, I saw one actor in the uniform of a white guard officer. I realized that the theatre rented out stage costumes. With a blocked nose, I approached the wardrobe manager to ask her to let me wear some coat from an old show that was no longer used, but not yet disposed of. They gave me the leather coat of Soviet General Serpilin from the play of the same name. Its color was indeterminate because of its age and it being worn out. The names of the actors who had played General Serpilin were written in ink in a column in the inside pocket. When I wore it and lifted the collar, I immediately felt my relaxed countenance begin to acquire the traits of a combat general. Instead of a pistol, I got a handmade yellow-striped Dutch umbrella. I paid for it by going into debt, and I started to stroll along the streets of my hometown in my costume. A police patrol stopped me in Nevsky Prospect one day. The officers were young, but evidently had heard about the famous urban freaks. They immediately understood what they were dealing with and demanded my documents, and I had a lot of them. My passport, Komsomol and military tickets, a pass to the Komisarjevskaya Theatre, and a Union of Artists membership ticket. It was the latter document for some reason that interested them. "So, are you exhibiting at the Louvre?" one cop asked with a venomous smile. "No," I said, "but if you turn around you'll see my work," and we stood right next to the windows of the Café Abrikosov, from where my Chinese art dolls were looking curiously at us. In this way my dolls saved me from police brutality. Parallel to my theatre job, I designed dolls for city cafes and windows and made masks for a performance of Shakespeare's Macbeth on the small stage of the Too's Youth Theatre. Sometimes I made portrait dolls to order. By this time, an art dolls community had already formed, artists who chose artistic dolls as their main creative direction. It was time to mount an exhibition. I wanted to introduce the pioneers of the new movement to familiarize others with their different techniques, with their individual creative language.
There was a period of my life when I stopped exhibiting in St. Petersburg. I spent a year and a half in America, repairing and restoring vintage carpets. And when I arrived in St. Petersburg, I really didn't know how to start to do anything again. And then, one wonderful day, Roma called me. He was a complete stranger to me, but he invited me to participate in an exhibition called "You Are a Doll Too," and it was a miracle. It felt as if it was some angel who had called me, because most probably no one among the artists knew that I was back and wanted to do something. I could hardly understand it myself. And it was from that moment that my local St. Petersburg life began. I got to know Natasha Belchakova, Ira Yablочкина, and Olga Kasyanenko. And in this way, Roma opened a new an old life of mine.
We agreed to stage it in the Center of National Cultures in Nevsky Prospekt. One of the artists thought up a witty name. You are a doll too. It was an exhibition of the pure art of decorative dolls and was another stage of the doll evolution. Now there are doll festivals, biennales and craft bazaars. Exhibitions run at 3 museums, 5 galleries, a business centre and the Manege exhibition hall all at once. But back then we were a local group, creating a new level of culture. About the same time, I received an order from the State Museum of the History of St. Petersburg for a series of full-size dolls, pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg characters. I had to make a janitor, a teenage apprentice, a nobleman's son, and a retired old soldier of the Preobrazhensky Regiment. The founding of 2 non-state museums was an important milestone in the development of doll making in our city. After the Serious Games exhibition, Maria Marchenko opened the Museum of Creative Toys in 1997. The St. Petersburg Museum of Dolls, created by Galina Varenyuk, opened in 1998.
You have to understand what a wonderful person Roma was. He wasn't just like everyone else. Although there were a lot of artists who came forward in the 90s, he was very different to the others. And he gave quite delicate, important advice in a very unobtrusive way. The point of his tips only became evident in hindsight. He never imposed anything, but his ideas had a seed in them that fell on fertile soil. He was a very kind man, unselfish. He donated so much of his work to us. It was amazing. Gali, he would say, I want you to have this. He brought one of his first old ladies and showed her to me. She is marvelous, I said. He didn't believe me. Do you like her? Yes, I do. Seriously? Take her as a gift. I couldn't do this. I offered him money, knowing that at that time many artists were poor. Of course, if we talk about the founding of the museum, Roma always supported it, saying, you have such a large collection, it needs to be put on display. He was bringing in and sending artists here. All the artists who I worked with came through Roman. I believe that he was at the foundation of the museum. He did a lot to ensure it came about.
As a child, I didn't like the traditional circus. I was always worried that the juggler would drop his mace, or that the unhappy, tortured animals would defecate in the arena. I could not watch the trapeze artists at all, fearing that they would fall and break into pieces. However, as a decorative theme for the exhibitions of the new dolls, the circus was wonderful. The Blue Dining Room was the venue chosen by the Artists' Union. Circus photos from the end of the 19th century, printed from original glass positives held in the Archive of Cinema and Sound Records, covered the walls. The number of participants had noticeably grown since the previous exhibition, although, as in the past, I was the lone male doll maker. The year 2000 represented not only the transition to the third millennium. For me, it was marked by 2 events. In a narrowly professional way, the transition to sculptured dolls, and in the broader sense that the genre of creative decorative dolls had established a strong foundation in the art doll community that united quite a lot of wonderful artists making original works. A professional community was created in studios, galleries, and schools of art doll making. Popular were art doll makers' masterclasses, giving a creative charge to aspiring artists. The circle of collectors expanded significantly. The direction that I took I called sculptured doll making, as I preferred to work in traditional technologies, paper, flour, glue, wood, and natural fabrics. In my view, sculptured doll making is a balance between decorative dolls and sculpture, like a circus balance act on a tightrope. From the doll side, it has light cartooning of the image, doll ratios of body sizes, and uses materials unconventional for sculpture such as plastics, paper mache, and color. From the sculpture side, it has a stable shape, a strong hard surface, a specific posture, and plasticity. I made my first doll Durama in 1984. After that I made a lot more Duramas. It remains to be guessed what exactly had captivated me with this figure since childhood. I hope it was not a similarity of my character to that of the spiteful figure in Buratino, the Russian version of Pinocchio. Most likely I felt pity for this hunched, shabby figure who was always falling into puddles. St. Petersburg is a mystical city, concealing mysteries of history and of their personalities associated with it. Masks as a decorative artistic movement well emphasize this and reveal the essence of the city. The facades of St. Petersburg's houses bear countless images of human or animal faces. But the paradox is that we have very few artists who are passionate about making masks. Apart from me, I know only two people, Igor Vassiliev and Andrei Kabul.
Так случилось, что у нас с Романом одной из общих тем в творчестве стала тема маски, не сговариваясь. Мы к этому пришли.
It happened by chance that Roman and I both made the mask one of the themes of our work. We both came up with this independently, the mask as a flexible object, artistic image, philosophical replica, symbolic secret. Mask, face, iconic character. I think one reason why we got into this topic so strongly together are the mascarons of St. Petersburg that surround us as we wander these old streets. Some old walls have silent eyes piercing through passers-by, or, on the contrary, frozen in contemplation of inner harmony. But they always have a powerful energy, and the walls themselves, cracked, covered in shabby plaster with rusty stains, are like a changing picture in which the imprints of the past, the shadows of people who once lived, their surreal portraits, are hidden. I think all this is important when choosing the mask as an artistic object. I think Roma chose masks probably under the influence of his past in the theatre. Roma's masks are neither replicas of the mascarons of St. Petersburg, nor are they an ethnic retelling of folk motifs. His work has a completely unique artistic language, inherent only to him, brightly expressive and with a warm-hearted irony. His favourite materials were paper mache and wood, and painted usually in one colour, sepia. He chose to use a single colour so that nothing interfered with the deep content embedded in the object, in its psychostructure, which affects the viewer. Roman's artistic collection is complete, and at the same time incomplete, because when I look at the sky, at the cumulus clouds, it seems to me that Roman is now God's apprentice and is sculpting up there some ever-changing, otherworldly images. In recent years, I have been fascinated by artistic toys and organized a collective exhibition of them under the name Pappacarlo Corporation in 2013. My graphics are mostly made with the same technique I use to make sculptured dolls.
Сползает по крыше старик Козлодоев
пронырливый, как карастель. Стремится в окошко залезть Козлодоев к какой-нибудь бабе в постель. Вот раньше бывало гулял Козлодоев, глаза его были пусты, и свистом всех женщин зывал Козлодоев заняться любовью в кусты.
How did a doll turn into a small city sculpture? I invented the St. Petersburg Angel in 2001. He was wearing a burlap coat. A long canvas scarf was twisted around his neck. There was no stand. His suitcase just stood next to him as part of the composition. It was still an art doll. In later versions of the angel, I began to paste on textiles, forming solid decorative textures and colouring them. It has become a sculptured doll. I was invited to participate in a symposium on urban sculpture in 2012. I entered a model of the St. Petersburg Angel in the form of a sculptured doll in the competition. Although the filing format was strange for the commission, I was among the winners. And now a bronze doll, the Angel of St. Petersburg, sits on a bench in the Izmailovsky garden near the Youth Theatre on Fontanka.
I relate to the art of sculptor Roman Shustrov, who is no longer with us, with enormous respect. I'm absolutely certain that his angel, which sits on a park bench in the Izmailovsky garden, will become one of the symbols of St. Petersburg. And his old lady with a dog will also become such a symbol whenever a worthy place is found for it in one of the city's public spaces. Small sculptures, such as those made by Roman Shustrov, are very important for our city. They give the city something unique and create a sense of place of attraction and beauty. I think it is necessary to promote them. I believe that not only Roman's work, but the work of other sculptors will find their places across our city to give it the charm that we value and love. It would be not only to remember Roman Shustrov, but it is also something our wonderful city needs.
I think there are too few soulful urban sculptures in St. Petersburg, and they are needed now, I judge by the reaction of those who visit the St. Petersburg Angel. I hope that there will come a time when doll makers will actively participate in the design of the city. After all, who, if not them, can create the kindest and most sincere characters for the people? I wish good health to all my relatives, close people, and friends. Roma.